Good morning, everybody. How is everyone today? All right, a thumbs up in your little thingy there if you want to do a thumbs up and eye. I've got my chat window open, but I am going to share my screen in a couple of minutes. And so I don't think I'll be able to see the chat once I do that. None of us will, because I'll share my screen.
Okay. I don't know if I can or not once you share your screen.
Yeah. So, welcome. We have developed over the time at Up and Farms, we've developed a series of crop production templates. They're designed with the small grower in mind. And I'm going to try and keep my presentation to about 18, 17 minutes here so that we can do all this. There we go. So let's see if I have my screen here. Let's see, there we go. So you all see that now?
Mm-hmm. And I can also see the chat, so I can keep an eye on questions.
Awesome. So you can still use chat, guys, to do that. And I see you all in the corner of my screen now. So that's awesome. All of these templates that I have, they're all designed the same. So let me talk about how they're designed. And we said that they're really designed with small growers in mind. They're designed to give you a weekly idea within reason of what that crop needs, so that you can anticipate needs in the future and be ready to do that in the week that it needs to be done. Obviously, the weather plays a role, and the days are going to be shifted a little bit. But if a grower follows these templates, they're going to have a high quality crop, and they're going to get close to maximum yield for their situation. And that's going to allow you not just to have maximum revenue that Ms. Danita talked about, it's actually going to allow you to have maximum profit. And total revenue is not what's really important if you're not making any money. You make $1 million, but you lose, you get $1 million, but it costs you $1 million and $1 to do the $1 million, then you've lost $1, and that doesn't help anything. So this is going to, believe it or not, when you do this, you minimize the losses, you maximize the quality of the produce, maximize the opportunity for us to sell the stuff. Like some of this other stuff, we'll all be better farmers and growers and a group as we keep going up this ladder of quality and productivity. So this, at the top of these screens, or at the top of the pages of these templates, the crop is named in the top left, and that's, in this case, tomatoes staked field. I did not differentiate on this: cherry tomato, grape tomato, slicer tomato, all that, green tomato, red tomato. Didn't do that. Just staked field tomatoes is what it is. Then it has a field ID for you to put in your field ID. If you have more than one planting of tomatoes, you may have a field ID for that. Then it has crop ID next to that. So if you want to identify the crop even further, say that this is the 7 rows of Santa grape tomato or something, you can do that to narrow it down for yourself. It does not have a farm ID on here because this is your record. This is an individual farm record. This is not an Up and Farms group. This is not a group record for all of us, for MDC or Up and Farms or the Holly Springs group or anything. This is an individual farms record. The columns are all going to be the same on all these that I go through in the future. Days before and after planting. And what I mean by days before planting, so the planting date is day 0. The day we set the crop in the ground is day 0 on all of these templates. But we have stuff to do before we plant to get ready to plant. So those are going to be negative numbers. And I'll show you that in a minute here with that first row in a minute. After, to the right of that column is going to be the activity or activities for that week. And I've kind of grouped these into weeks, and sometimes with the preliminary stuff, it's months. So like ordering seeds and trays and stuff, you have a couple of months to do that, but you got to do it in advance, and you'll see that in a second here. Then next to that is you can put down in advance of the season the date that you're planning on doing this. If you're planning on planting your tomatoes out, you're transplanting them on April 5th, you can write that in this column in the right row. Then you can keep track of what you actually did. Maybe the weather was crummy on the 5th and you didn't set the tomatoes out until the 10th. Or maybe you looked at the forecast and there was no frost forecast and you planted them on March 29th. which would be awesome. And then you can note the actual activities performed. I planted the tomatoes, I fertilized them with transplant water or whatever it is. And then you can initial it if you want to document who did it, who was in charge of keeping that record. So let's look at this first row here real quick. We have days before or after planting. And in that first row, underneath the heading row, it says -20 to -90. Well, that means 3 or 4 months before you intend to plant the crop in the ground, you should have all of this stuff listed in the next column completed. You should have ordered your seed 60 to 90 to 120 days before you plant. You should have gotten all of the greenhouse supplies or contracted with a grower to grow your seedlings. This is going to prevent you from, by doing all this stuff preliminarily, it's going to prevent you from getting to that April 5th date, which we'll see in a few minutes, and saying, oh my goodness, I don't have enough tomato plants. So so we're going to order seeds and greenhouse supplies, and or we're going to have a contract with a transplant grower for transplant production. And we do all of that at least 3 or 4 months ahead of schedule, at least 3 or 4 months ahead of the time we want to plant, because you got to reserve bench space in the greenhouse, and you have to have a relationship and all that stuff. We're also back in that time between 120 and 190 days, or 90 days rather. We're going to inventory all of our chemicals and all of our fertilizers and supplies for the production of this entire crop. Everything from growing those transplants all the way through boxing the last one up and getting it off the farm. We want to make sure that even if we don't have all that stuff on hand, that we're going to have it on hand in advance of the time we need it. There is nothing less efficient on a farm than having to go to the hardware store from the field 3 or 4 times during the day while you're doing something. And we've all been there, and we're all going to be there again. This is not, not going to be 100%. But if we, if you know you're going to grow 5,000 tomato plants, and you know that you have 500 steaks on the farm right now, then you know that you have to order another 2,000 steaks, because there's a steak every other plant. So you can do that now. Same with boxes and lugs, picking baskets and lugs, or knives for cutting squash. All that stuff we cover in this preliminary stuff. And so on this, if we have a planting date and we work from that 0 date, if we know that we are going to plant on April 5th is the day I've been using this whole thing, then we can back up from that. And we can say April 5th, March 5th, February 5th, January 5th. So no later than January 5th do I want to have all this stuff done. We're a month after that already today. That's okay. Again, we are walking up a ladder together here. This is not a oh my gosh, I didn't do it already thing. This is a we're walking up this ladder together, guys, kind of thing. But we want to get there as much as we can. And some of you already are, and I understand that. And but when we all get there, then we're all going to have that much more profitability and success in all of this. So your date planned. So let's say January 5th was your date planned to have that done. But here it is February 1st. So your date completed, or February 4th. So your date completed. You might not have all of this done on this year until February 28th. It's okay, write it down. At least we have a record of it for this year. And then then when you review this all next fall and you say, oh, I was late on that, that means I do got to get started back here right around Thanksgiving to get this all done in time. And I'd love it if we can get all this preliminary stuff for the spring vegetables. If we can get it so most of that is getting done before New Year's Day, oh my gosh, you guys don't know how much more money you're going to make. It's amazing. It's amazing. You write down the activities performed. I contracted with Jones Greenhouse to grow 10,000 tomato plants. I ordered trays from BWI or Humbert International. I have 14 bales of peat-based potting soil and label tags, and I contacted Harris Seeds and Johnny's to order my seeds, and Arbico for my pesticides, or whoever it is. or Jimmy Sanders, which is now Simplot. And then you initially just you want to document who did it. When we go to the next one on the tomato one, it says -30. And again, that's 30 days before the planting date. We're going to sow seed in transplant trays that are 98 to 128 cell trays. There are a lot of folks that use 72 cell trays, and I'm okay with that. And if you want to modify this slightly for that, that's fine. It just costs more money to grow in a 72 cell tray per plant than it does to grow in a 98 or a 128. And if you handle the plants correctly, a 98 or a 128 will yield exactly the same, if not more, than a 72 cell tray. There are others that will grow in a 3.5-inch pot, where they'll start in a small pot and move on to a bigger pot. Things like that that are standard practices. You can modify these. Now, this is kind of key right here. You can modify these templates if you modify them using standard practices. If you modify them using something that's not standard, that's not going to help you as much. And it may reduce the chance that you get the premiums that that we talked about earlier. That we were able to get the maximum quality tomato to give you the maximum value for your crop. So that's important. And then it says to grow out using the transplant production guide. Now that you don't have the transplant production guide here today, you'll have that very soon. There's one that we have, and there's also Mississippi State has a pretty good one for small growers, and there are several others online. And you'll have those. And you've actually got there are several peers on this call today that are excellent transplant growers and have a lot of experience with it. So they can help you if you want to grow your own and you're not familiar with it. And again, you write your dates. The next thing to do is to prepare your ground. And we want to prepare our ground before we plant. And you're going to see this is going to, when I go over the next set of templates, the next time we do this, it'll go much faster than this because the stuff becomes the same for everything. But you want to prepare your ground before the day you're going to plant. You want to till it, you want to disc it, and then till it and incorporate all of the recommended pre-plant fertilizer from your soil test. Any pre-emergent herbicides you're going to want to put on at that time. You're going to want to make your raised beds, lay your plastic mulch, put your drip tape down, all of that stuff. And you've got to do all that between zero. You have about 3 weeks in advance. If you do it much more than that in advance, then you start having weed issues between the row, and you start reducing the chance that the plastic is going to survive the whole season if you're using plastic mulch and things. But that 2 or 3 weeks, when you get that nice dry weather and the soil is right for working the ground, for working it, that's when you want to do that. And you can actually do it. Notice that is 0 to -21. So you can actually do it the morning of planting. You can do all this in one day. It depends on how much you're planting and how big you are and all that good stuff. So, but 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm preaching to the choir a little bit on some of this stuff because you guys know a lot of this stuff. But this is going to kind of unify our practices among farms, and unify the expectations among farms, and that could be really good. It'll be really good for some of the larger markets that you guys hope to tap into. Then on 0 day, 0 day is transplant day in the case of a tomato. It's a seeding day on the case of something like greens, but like mustard greens. But here it's a transplant day. We're going to transplant the crop into moist but not wet beds. So if they were really dry, if they got dried out, then we're going to irrigate them a couple days before we plant, so that they're moist but not wet. You don't want to flood them the day that you're planting, because it makes it difficult to plant. It makes it can lead to soil rots, root rots, and things. Anyway, so you're going to transplant the crop into moist but not wet beds, about 2 feet between the plants. Beds should be about 6 to 8 feet apart, and each plant should be watered in. And our transplanters will pre-water the holes, so that's sufficient. But if you don't have our transplanter, then you want to make sure that you pour a cup of water or nutrient more. Or better than that is to use a transplant solution, which is a high that gets the plants growing well. Let's see. Let's see. So day 7. Now we're going to go week by week, and I'm not going to go through every week because it gets pretty rote after the first couple weeks. But let's go through day 7, 14, 21. Then I'm going to skip until the first harvest. Okay. So starting on the week after they go in the ground, we want to go back and look at those plants. We want to make sure that they got established uniformly, that they're all green and growing, that they're all standing upright, that there's no puddling or water issues or dry issues, that there's not an area where the plants are what's called damping off, which is where the seedling rots off at the soil line, that we haven't started seeing aphids or other insects. Anything that we see that's a negative, we're going to want to treat, we're going to manage. We're going to have to keep in mind something called a PHI. That's a pre-harvest interval. That's so if you're spraying a pesticide, all of them these days, even the organic ones, have a number of days before harvest that you can plant, that you can spray. So some products like BT, which is an organic insecticide, it has a 0 PHI. So you can spray it in the morning and harvest in the afternoon. Other things like 7 has a 7-day PHI. How am I doing on time? I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, you're okay.
We're gonna get there. This is awesome. And then also you want to start looking in the middle of your rows, because if there's tiny little weeds coming up between the rows in that 7 to 14 day period, you want to get those controlled when they're tiny. And a shielded sprayer with a burn down herbicide, or even like horticultural vinegar or citrus oil, or if you're non-organic, something like paraquat, which you now have to have a license, a specific training for, by the way, if you're going to use paraquat these days. And small growers, honestly, we're just about out of the paraquat business because we do not have the spraying systems to do them meeting the new requirements. So now you're talking a shielded spray of Roundup on a clear day if you're doing something like that. And there may be some other stuff. Moving on to the to day 21, which is 3 weeks after planting, transplanting. Again, we're going to continue to scout that crop for uniformity. Oh, by the way, in that 7-day one, you're going to want to replace any plants that have died if you want to. When it gets past 7 days on a tomato crop, any replants and stuff, it kind of messes up the uniformity in the field and stuff, and there's not much value in the efficiency. Doesn't help. But by day 21, we're scouting every week. We're scouting for uniformity. We're looking at water issues again. We're looking for diseases that might be building up, especially along the soil line, because remember, the plants are still small at day 20.
Bill, you're breaking up a little bit. You might need to repeat what you're saying.
I'm sorry. Yeah, internet is tough on my computer some days. But
The
yeah,
last thing I heard was breaking up the soil. I think is the last thing I heard you say. Breaking up.
I don't know that. That's a while ago. How long ago have I been? What?
Oh no, maybe it was just about a minute ago, 2 minutes ago. That
Yeah, we're gonna. But I'm on day 21, and we want to start looking at diseases and insects. You're going to start seeing flea beetles and aphids, and we'll do some other trainings on how to identify these insects. We're going to have some field trainings, and we're going to have some video trainings on how to ID these things. And I'm going to have some pesticide lists out there. They change so frequently, though. Oh my gosh. But if you're using a fungicide, we want you to use a fungicide program, because fungicides are applied preventatively, even organic fungicides. So we want you to start those in day 14-ish and continue a weekly fungicide program, unless it's ridiculously dry, and then you can document that, because you don't have, if there's no rain and no dew, and the temperatures are mild, then a fungicide program, you can get by with extending that interval. But the basic plan is every 7 days for fungicides, and insecticides only as needed to control insects. Right? Fungicides are preventative and insecticides are curative. Fungicides are never curative. You can't, once you get a fungus, you cannot cure it after it's on the plant. So we have to prevent it, and that's the difference there. So we're going to look at that. We're going to treat our insects as needed, keeping those pre-harvest intervals in mind again. We're going to hoe around the rows and clean weeds out of the holes in the plastic if they're going to be a problem. But then on day 28, that's when we have to do our side dressing of our tomatoes. That 28 to 35 day window there, that week there, we want to add some extra nitrogen. That's going to be the rest of the nitrogen that the plant requires. There's another standard practice where we put it on every week through the drip. Our growers pretty much are not set up for that, but if you want to do that, we can talk about that. But the standard practice for this template is to apply another 30 pounds of nitrogen as calcium nitrate, and that calcium nitrate will help reduce the chance of blossom end rot if we have any of that situation in your. You can also use potassium nitrate or a liquid 28 to 32% liquid solution for nitrogen. It's all about getting nitrogen on in this second set of, all the phosphorus and potassium should already be on the field, okay? And we can apply this through the drip system, or if you don't have, all of those will be dissolvable in water and put through the drip. And you have to do that because you can't put fertilizer, granular fertilizer, in the holes of the plastic, because you'll burn the stems of the tomatoes if you do that, if you just stick granules in the holes in the plastic. So it has to go through the drip. And there's some very inexpensive injector systems out there. Otherwise, there's one other way to do that, and we can talk about that if one of you needs that situation. We're still every week scouting for uniformity of the crop and for insects and applying another fungicide treatment. We're rotating our chemistry so that we make sure that we're not applying the same fungicide every week. And this goes back to that bulk buying that David was talking about. If we get it so that you all kind of sharing and going to Sanders or Simplot or Arbico or whatever, and ordering by the case and sharing that cost together, that's going to allow you to buy the mix of chemistry that you need to get this done really well. 35, same thing, we're scouting and treating. 42, we're scouting and treating. What's not on here, and I have to add back to this, and it will be added on this week, is I have to add when you're going to do the stakes, because you have to put the stakes on the field about day 20, and then I got to teach you about stringing too. That's going to be a whole separate dealy what's it's here. Some of you all know how to do that and are very good at it, but that's also another thing in here that we have to do. We have to stake and string tomatoes we stake them about the 14th to the 21st, and we add a string once a week through about day 45. We add about 4 or 5 strings up there about 6 inches apart, and that's got to be added. I just noticed that for some reason that is not on here, and I don't know why. Excuse me. When you read through this, you'll notice that the insects that I mentioned by day 49, now I'm starting to talk about fruit worms and spider mites and some things that are more mid-season insects rather than early season insects. And so you got to think about those, and that continues. And then by day 70, we should be at the harvest. That could be a little earlier depending on what you're doing. It could be a week later depending on what you're doing. But harvest begins about day 70, and we're going to recommend that you harvest your tomatoes at least twice a week. More, you can go to 3 days a week, but if you go to 1 day a week, you're just not going to be able to get the pack that you want. You're not going to be able to get that high quality pack, and you're not going to maximize your yields. So 2 days a week, starting about day 70, we're still continuing our scouting. By the time harvest begins, we're probably just we're done stringing and staking. We're done stringing tomatoes. We're not adding any more strings after harvest begins. That's all done. Again, day 77, we're harvesting twice weekly. We're continuing our scouting. Remember that you're irrigating all through this season too, and that's not on this template, but that's going to be in a separate thing, how to irrigate the crop. 84, we're still harvesting. 91, we may still be harvesting, we may not. 98, we may still be harvesting, we may not, but it's on there. Until we get to Notice on 98 that by the time we get to about 10 days to 2 weeks from the last harvest, we don't have to do any more fungicide sprays. It's not going to help us. It's not going to help the fruit quality even, which is why we do continue it later. It's not to maintain the leaves after about day 75. It's to maintain the fruit quality after day 75. But now 98, harvesting twice weekly. We're still scouting for insects because fruit stuff can be a problem. Spider mites can kick your tail in a matter of just a few days. So you still have to scout for those buggers. But now we get to the end of the crop, day 112. We're terminating any harvest. We're removing all the items from the field. It's very important that we clean up our fields as soon as we can after we're done harvesting. It's very important. Why is that important? Not for this crop. It's very important for the next crop. It's very important that we get all the strings and stakes out of there. We clean the strings up so they don't get bound up on our equipment. We get the stakes out of there so we can clean them up and get them stored properly so they last as long as they can and they don't bring disease to the next crop. And then it's very important that we mow and till under the crop residue that's there so that it doesn't harbor any diseases for the rest of the season that might get into our next crop.